Extroverted thinking uses critical thinking, a type of directed thinking that analyzes specific evidence or objective data to form a judgment. It formulates theories or general conclusions through inductive reasoning. Extroverted thinking creates empirical truths. It is a posteriori, where knowledge is obtained through experience. Empirical truths are a matter of fact, but you can imagine circumstances that would make them false. Examples of empirical statements would be, there is a table in this room. We would have to look around the room to see whether this is true. Or, I am wearing shoes. We would have to look at my feet to confirm. This is used in the natural sciences when trying to prove a hypothesis through the scientific method of gathering data that can be measured, observed, and replicated. Extroverted thinking is the function used for planning and prioritizing to set and meet goals. It is used for organization to keep track of things physically and mentally. Extroverted thinking is the function that is used for segmenting and systematizing, setting boundaries, guidelines, and parameters, and organizing for efficiency and scheduling. According to Beebe, it is planning through regulating for the purpose of enforcing. Introverted sensing oftentimes gets a bad rap for being overly organized. But from my perspective and understanding, it is actually TE that is associated with OCD. The reason ISTJs are generally far more organized and structured than the ISFJs is because the ISTJ has TE parent, which is establishing or adopting protocols and organizational structures that the SI hero is implementing and following with repetition to create and form habits, whereas the ISFJ has TE trickster and creates and form habits more inclined to social norms and creating harmony with their FE parent. The ESTJ has TE as their hero, and their SI parent reinforces those beloved protocols and organizations that their hero has created. An overly active TE function can result in a supervisor that micromanages their employees and loses their shit when something is not to their standard of structure and efficiency. Essentially, if someone doesn't do it the way they would do it. This type of management is a result of an imbalance or an overuse of their beloved savior function. Simply put, they need to work on their introverted thinking and extroverted feeling functions to balance them out and gain some perspective by reflecting on their actions and thinking and seeing how it impacts others and their productivity in the workplace. TE is a fantastic skill and can make wonderful frameworks to get shit done. The problem is that some TE users don't realize that some of these things that makes them efficient are mere preferences, and these preferences may actually slow down the process for someone else who is more efficient when using their preferences. However, ensuring that everything is taken care of and protocols followed is crucial regardless of preferences. Introverted thinking uses reflective thinking, a type of directed thinking that explores different reasons for, considers the potential implications of, and is influenced by an individual's attitudes or practices. It is a process that allows you to make meaning of an experience, involves analytic and critiquing elements, and can be articulated through spoken, written, or other forms of expression. Analysis, in this context, is the process of breaking a complex topic into smaller parts to gain a better understanding of it. and critiquing involves a questioning approach to knowledge and checking assumptions. An individual who engages in reflective thinking will question their own assumptions and understandings and think about issues from a variety of perspectives. This type of higher order thinking can be developed through practice, but it involves understanding, internalizing, and applying some key concepts to evaluate your own learning. Thus, introverted thinking relies on subjective data to confirm if general assumptions and theories are in fact true, using deductive reasoning. As mentioned earlier, extroverted thinking uses inductive reasoning, which involves drawing a general conclusion from a set of specific observations. It is a kind of bottom-up logic because it involves widening specific premises out into broader generalizations. Unfortunately, inductive reasoning allows for the possibility that a conclusion can be false, even if all the premises are true. For example, polls use only a small sample of the population in that area to determine the outcome of an election. Let's say the people that participated in a poll are all from the same area, and 70% of the sample set voted blue, 25% voted red, and 5% voted green. The conclusion would then be that blue is likely to win on election day. Though the information going in may be accurate and provide evidentiary support for this conclusion, the conclusion may not be true because you are pulling from a small sample set and extrapolating it. You could have a large portion of people that don't participate in polls that are voting for red and or green, and the underdog, according to the polls, could be the actual winner. This was the case for the 2016 election, where people couldn't believe Hillary lost. However, if you stepped outside any major city and simply had a conversation with people, you would know that the polls were wrong, and it wouldn't have been a surprise. Deductive reasoning is a top-down logic because it goes from general rules already accepted as true and narrows it down to specific observations. With deductive reasoning, if the premises are true, the conclusion will always be valid. However, if the premises are false, the conclusion could be invalid, even if the argument is sound. For example, college volleyball players are tall. Sarah is 5'3". Therefore, Sarah did not play college volleyball because she is short. Based off this, the argument is sound and would be valid if the premises were both true. However, not all college volleyball players are tall, and thus you cannot know if Sarah was or wasn't a college volleyball player based solely on her height. You could still be correct though. However, in this case, I am only 5'3" and I did play volleyball in college. Introverted thinking creates conceptual truths. It is a priori, where knowledge is obtained by analyzing concepts independent of experience, creating necessary truths that cannot possibly be false. Examples of necessary truths would be, all triangles have 3 sides. You don't need to know this by comparing actual triangles. You know by analyzing what the words mean. Or, a vixen is a female fox. This would be true if no foxes existed, because that's just what vixen means. Or 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is a conceptual truth. Conceptual truths simply need to be known to be understood. They do not require input from our 5 senses. We simply know them. Conceptual truth is completely dependent on the use and meaning of language and is central in mathematics and symbolic logic. I was the weird kid who loved doing math equations during summertime in like the 1st grade. That was my TI child playing. TI users are very particular with their word choice because they want to mean what they say and be understood correctly. I know I will say a word and then realize that may not be quite the right fit for what I mean, and then adjust my sentence to better reflect what I'm trying to get across. When I say TI user, or SI user, or NI user, I am meaning that this function is in their ego stack. I am not saying that those with it in their unconscious do not use it. Everyone uses all the functions. To what degree and how and why depends on the placement in your cognitive stack. In simple terms, introverted thinking is about analyzing and categorizing. It is evaluating according to principles and whether something fits the framework or model. It is checking for inconsistencies and clarifying for precision and refining. According to Beebe, it is defining through naming for the purpose of understanding. Introverted thinking is also the function responsible for impulse control, meaning it thinks before it acts. It does this by first checking for consequences to the actions by utilizing if-then statements as a form of cause and effect practice. This is known as conditional thinking. Introverted thinking tends to overthink and get locked into analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis describes an individual overanalyzing a situation, causing forward motion or decision-making to become paralyzed, meaning that no solution or course of action is decided upon within a natural time frame. A situation may be deemed too complicated, and a decision is never made or made much too late due to anxiety that a potentially larger problem may arise. A person may desire a perfect solution but may fear making a decision that could result in error, while on the way to a better solution. Equally, a person may hold that a superior solution is a short step away and stall in its endless pursuit with no concept of diminishing returns. On the opposite end of the time spectrum is the phrase extinct by instinct, which is making a fatal decision based on hasty judgment or a gut reaction. I believe introverted thinking has anxiety due to too much information that it can't be narrowed down, or conflicting information that the correct one can't be determined, because when TI accepts something as true, it starts to build its world based on those truths. And if later you learn that those truths were in fact false, you experience what I call a tower moment. Essentially, your foundation gets ripped out from under you, and you must start over and rebuild in your thinking. I see this like having to build a home on sand, and the tide comes in every night and washes it away over and over and over again. TI is wanting a bedrock foundation to build upon to avoid these tower moments. It is my understanding that INTPs experience existential crises over and over because of these tower moments, and NI critic saying that death is inevitable, and they question if any of this matters and what's the point of existence. I wish I had been able to know and explain this before my INTP brother took his own life 16 years ago. In his final letter, he mentioned that this wasn't where he was meant to be. Living in a TJ country can be quite difficult for the rest of us who aren't TJs. Not saying that life in general isn't difficult for everyone, but it is especially difficult for those that aren't. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it.